This portion of the meeting must be received by 3 p.m. Wednesday, November 16, 2022. The City of Sugar Land reserves the right to remove any written, emailed comments deemed inappropriate as outlined on the agenda and or not related to matters posted on the agenda. Comments or discussion by the City Council, Board, and or Commission members will only be made at the time the subject is scheduled for consideration. Has anyone submitted public comments? No, sir. Okay. Now we'll move forward to a consideration of and action on the minutes of the September 21st, 2022 meeting. Does anyone have any corrections? Okay. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
I second.
Okay, we'll take a vote.
Could you say who made the motions, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, Mr. Morton made the motion, and Ms. Peterson second. Okay. Is there one more vote? Do we have 5?
Jan, I think yours isn't coming up. Yeah, you can close out.
I don't know where the sign-in thing comes from. My login has gone away. So you can take a hand vote.
Okay, let's take a hand vote. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay.
Sorry.
The vote passes unanimously.
That's easier anyway.
Okay. And now we move to the annual orientation, item 4A, review of and discussion on purpose, roles, responsibilities, and functions of the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
And welcome. So this is your annual orientation for the Zoning Board of Adjustment. Just wanted to start off by introducing myself, Lisa Kochmeyer, Director of Planning and Development Services. Myself and the other ladies that are here with me, Lauren Fair, and the Assistant Director of Planning and Development Services, and Laura Waller, one of our planners, Planner 2 for our department. We work to support you and the items that come before you for your consideration and action. Just wanted to touch on kind of our department. We are the Planning and Development Services Department. We have kind of 3 main buckets or areas that we focus on: the development planning and services, which is led by Lauren. So that is your development review and permitting processes. We have our long-range planning group and strategic implementation, which is led by Ruth Lomer. And they are focusing on comprehensive planning, master planning, kind of that big picture, long-range planning effort for the city. And then we have our building inspections and plan review, focusing on building codes and making sure that the structures that are built here in the city are safe and up to code. And that is led by Joshua Doyle, who's our deputy building official. Also wanted to welcome and just kind of run through the membership for the Zoning Board of Adjustment that was appointed by City Council. So we have new chair and vice chair this year. So we have Chikrishra Paveda, who will be serving as chair, and Josh Morton, who will be your vice chair. And then we have our members, Jan Peterson, David James, and Robert Etcher, who have joined as regular members. And then we have 3 new alternate members. So we have Danilo Alvarado, Ravi Brambahart, and Philip Butler. And both Philip and Danilo are joining us, and Ravi may be joining us a bit later. But this is the membership, both regular members and alternate members for this year. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren, and she's going to walk you through some introduction of information.
Hi, thank you. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of the zoning board's authority through different codes and the city charter, and then talk a little bit about staff's role and just touch on the types of cases, and then Laura's going to take you through a little more details on the different types of cases that the board hears. So the authority for the Zoning Board of Adjustment comes from Chapter 211 of the Texas Local Government Code, and it charges the board with hearing and deciding on relief from zoning regulations. The board is also authorized through the city charter, as well as in the development code for the city. And with that comes with a series of adopted rules of procedures. So under the Texas Local Government Code, a ZBA is required to have adopted rules for how they operate and run the meetings. The city ZBA does operate on an adopted board rules. Criteria primarily includes attendance, the meeting times, how the charter authorizes the term limits, and the number of members, as well as swearing in of speakers during a meeting. And it sets the meetings as the third Wednesday of the month, unless we're canceled and we don't have a case. I'm going to go just a little bit through the adopted rules of procedures as they pertain to attendance. So the board is made up of 5 members with an alternate system, and that's established through the charter. The quorum has to have 4 members and takes all 4 for approval of an item. The expectation is that all the regular members and alternates will make the meetings and notify us when you're unable. We do say that alternates should plan to attend and sit in the audience and be prepared to move in to fill in for regular members when needed. That has happened. If a regular member doesn't show up, we need to pull somebody, one of the alternates, to fill in on the dais. And again, the expectation is for the alternates to stay as an audience member for the meeting, which really allows them to just hear the case, familiarize themselves with issues and the decision-making of the board for the various types of cases. So the staff's role behind the scenes. We are the liaison role to the zoning board. We will review and analyze the cases when they're submitted to advise the board. We prepare all the case materials, including your agenda requests before you, the public hearing notice that gets published, as well as if there's any photos that are needed or any field work as well. We coordinate with our other city staff departments because most of the time these cases come with a building permit. So we coordinate, with our building permits team as well as engineering if they are looking and reviewing the permit as well. And then our legal department as well, if we need them for a public hearing. And again, we prepare the written agenda request as well as this the PowerPoint presentation that Laura will present this evening. And so just quickly, the types of cases are variances, special exceptions, and appeals. So special exceptions is really the most common. That's most commonly what the board is going to see. It's related to setbacks for properties. And variances, we do have a couple here and there. They are to more bulk regulations, which is like height or maybe a parking variance. And then you all would be hearing an appeal, if we got one, an appeal of the staff's decision. And then you would serve as the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment if there were any height variances to any aviation requirements. That's very infrequent. And if we ever had to do it, we would bring you all here and give you training, and we would need training too. So that's how infrequent it is. So with that, I will hand it over to Laura, and she will talk you through some specifics.
Good evening. So not quite as tall as Lauren. So we're going to start by going through some of the variance processes. So as Lauren mentioned, variances are not very frequent, although they do happen. Maybe about 1 a year or so is typically the average. But these do provide alternatives to zoning regulations whenever there are some special circumstances present. So for instance, an example of a variance would be a 5-foot variance from a commercial setback of 30 feet. That means that they can build up to 25 feet now if the criteria for a variance is met. Per the state of Texas, we are not allowed to authorize land use variances. So these variances will be about zoning regulations apart from land use, so allowing a land use in a specific zoning district. So variances do require a 4 out of 5 vote, just as all matters that come before the zoning board does. And there are 4 criteria that must be met. That is that the variance is not contrary to public interest, special circumstances or conditions of the land or building are present, that literal enforcement of the ordinance results in an unnecessary hardship, and that the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. So we're going to go through those a little bit more detail. So criteria 1 is that the variance is not contrary to public interest. Staff typically assists with analysis of this, primarily public safety issues, access, as well as the context of the case to its surroundings. So maybe existing setback patterns in a neighborhood, maybe there's a large tree that's obstructing a setback, maybe something like a body of water, some things like that. This also would be where public comments and concerns would come into effect. So if a neighbor is concerned about variance being granted, it would probably relate to the public interest. And as are all of the criteria for variances, the criteria is subjective. So it's based up to you guys to make a decision about what you think is best for the case. Criterion 2 is about special circumstances or conditions that apply to the land or building. This is typically applicant-provided information that they present to the zoning board. This can be through a report or a letter or maybe a presentation, a verbal presentation. Staff analysis can also point to potential circumstances that could include lot size or shape. Maybe it's under small lot size because it's a remnant lot, something like that, so it cannot meet the normal zoning regulations and still be buildable. The location of an existing structure, so sometimes a structure is built, but then the zoning is applied after the structure is built. And again, this is another subjective criterion. Criterion 3 is about hardships. So that literal enforcement of the ordinance results in an unnecessary hardship. This is about what is reasonable as to necessary versus unnecessary requirements that the city might be putting on a property, or that zoning might be putting. So we do have a new state law that was recently passed in 2021 that was clarifying what unnecessary hardship means. So there are now 5 concrete options that can be considered as a hardship, and that includes financial costs greater than 50% of the appraised value of the existing structure if they met the zoning regulation. Loss to at least 25% of area where development may physically occur if compliance was met. So that might be about an undersized lot if at least 25% is less. Causing loss of compliance to another municipal code if you met the zoning regulation. So something maybe about public access, fire safety, or another building code if you met the zoning rule. Unreasonable encroachment into another property or nonconformity of an existing structure. That can be counted as a hardship. And then criterion 4, this is the most subjective out of the 4, but it is that if the variance is granted, the spirit of the ordinance is observed and substantial justice is done. So ideally that the feeling behind the ordinance that buildings would maybe be constructed similarly in setbacks, but because this lot is odd shaped, that they can still have their front yard and line up with the rest of the existing structures on their row of street, but maybe they don't actually meet to the exact foot. So again, this is a very subjective criterion, and it is up to the board to weigh the intent of the ordinance against what is actually happening in the case and on site. So an example of a variance, so this is going to be a commercial case for a parking setbacks. So there was a requests to have a smaller front setback. So they requested a 30-foot variance so that it can go from 30 foot is required to 0 feet required in order to be able to have enough parking spaces to meet the requirements for a community site. So, and then the side setback, so the proposed setback is 10 feet. So that would result in a 15-foot variance to the 25-foot that is required. And then at the rear, the proposed setback is 6 feet instead of 20, instead of 20, which is a 14-foot variance. So these were all granted for this site due to the very small nature of the site. They could not meet the larger setbacks that are required because this is a non-residential use next to residential uses. So they asked for this variance because of the small size of the lot and the low-intensity nature that is an HOA facility surrounding, that's in a neighborhood. The board did agree to grant these 3 variances for the front, side, and rear parking lot setbacks. Another example for a residential case is that there is an existing tree on a large lot that was blocking the side, so the house needed to shift to the other side. So instead of there being 5 feet on either side, there was 3 feet on one and 15 on the other, in order to make sure that there was enough room for the house to be built, but also being able to leave that very large, beautiful tree standing in the yard. So conditions can be placed on a variance, but they do need to relate directly to the site. And that can be through compliance, so require that they comply with the site plan or elevations, maybe a circulation plan for the parking or commercial variances, or they need to relate to mitigation. So that can be tree protection, such as the residential one you saw, screening and buffering, which is what the HOA case used. They had additional landscape screening in order to mitigate any effect on the neighbors of the parking lot. And then also the board can grant a variance for less than what's requested. So maybe on the commercial side, instead of granting the full 30-foot variance so that it's 0 feet off, they only granted 25, so you still have to have a 5-foot separation. So that could have been a possibility if the board felt that necessary. So we're going to move into special exceptions. These are going to be the cases you'll see most often. We used to have quite a few of them, months, maybe even 6 or 7 sometimes, but we've amended the code so they come forward a little bit less often, but they are still coming forward. We'll have actually 2 for you this evening after the orientation. So special exceptions are a tool that do provide zoning relief, just like variances, but they're a lot more straightforward. They are authorized through the city council in order to have a relief for residences that were platted and developed prior to being annexed into the city. So the key here is the platting, so that will have platted setbacks or HOA recorded deed restrictions that the home will follow instead of or in place of the current zoning setbacks. This is typically about compatibility, so does the structure fit in and match the rest of the surrounding neighborhood? Does it match the original development pattern rather than hardship, which is what has to be proven in the case of a variance? So the 4 criteria are that the lot was platted prior to annexation or prior to incorporation by the city. The recorded restrictions that they are electing to follow are less restrictive than zoning. That the special exception would not be less restrictive than those recorded restrictions. And then the 4th criteria is the compatibility question. Is the proposal detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the neighborhood? The first 3 criteria are very standard. They are yes, no questions. Does this meet or not? The 4th is a subjective question. So again, we do have those first 3 criteria that are verified before we even accept a special exception application. These are what we review whenever we are looking at building permits. We look at these 3 criteria. If they were platted beforehand and they meet their HOA restrictions, then we can offer the special exception as that kind of relief valve to maybe move forward with their project. And then criteria 4 is what we discuss and we analyze through the special exception process before we bring it to you. And so that is that the proposal is not detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the property within the district or neighborhood. This information on criterion 4 is typically presented through a staff report. This can address things like public safety issues, context of the case to the surrounding neighborhood. So that would be the existing setbacks. Do the structures that are currently there meet the zoning setbacks, or are they less? Do they follow the HOA patterns instead? And as always, the zoning board can request additional analysis or ask any further questions and table the item to be voted on at a later time. So an example of setbacks, what you might see as that comes before you in a case, is maybe a 15-foot street side build line instead of a 20-foot. So typically our zoning districts require 20 feet, but this plat would only require a 15. If this plat was recorded before the city was or excuse me, before it was annexed into the city. So they would be eligible for a special exception if they wanted to build to that 15-foot line, so long as the rest of the neighborhood was also built to the 15-foot build line. There's also deed restrictions. So this is the plat on the left. There's also deed restrictions. So we do sometimes see this for garages or other things like that. So for instance, this one is saying that a building cannot be closer than 15 feet to the street side, just like the plat is. So this does align with the plat that's here. Sometimes we'll see that a home cannot be closer than 15 feet to the rear property line, except for where there is a unenclosed patio cover or maybe a garage. So non-living space has to be at least 15 feet, but you can have a garage or a patio cover. But because of different definitions, maybe it meets the HOA rule, but not our city rules. So you do have 3 options as the zoning board whenever you're reviewing a case. The first one is approval. So you can agree with the first 3 statements that are fairly standard, as well as that 4th one, and approve the project just as is, no conditions, that it's not detrimental, you can build your project. The next option is denial, that there is some sort of issue, it is detrimental to maybe a surrounding property, or that it's not compatible with the existing neighborhood, that no other buildings are actually built to the platted setbacks, they're all built to city, so you don't believe that this project is compatible. Or the most common option is actually approval with conditions. So this can be a question where it could be detrimental, or it might have some other compatibility issues where you just want to be certain that a patio cover built, because we normally see patio covers, maybe the patio cover, you're worried about the materials matching. So you can, in that case, require conditions. Those conditions can be something like a cap on square footage. So you can have a patio cover so long as it's not bigger than 300 square feet, because that's what we typically see in this neighborhood. Or again, you can approve a setback that is between what is requested and what the regulation is. So they request a 10-foot setback, but you only grant a 7-foot setback. Or yes. Or you can also include a site plan and elevation, so that a property must be developed in accordance with that specific site plan. So you have to build this structure that you're proposing, and you cannot build anything else that would violate these rules. It would just be this structure that is eligible for the special exception. So an example, this special exception was actually what was approved in the minutes of September. So this was a patio cover that was going to go on the rear of a residence. And because it's attached to the house, it's considered part of the house, even though it's not living space. So this is where you can sometimes see the difference between HOA rules and city zoning. This does extend into that 15-foot required rear yard setback. So they're proposing a 9-foot setback instead. This addition was consistent with the surrounding properties. There were several others that also did not meet the 15-foot setback. And so the board did vote to approve with the conditions that the patio cover had to follow this site plan and the coordinating elevations. You might also hear appeals. So appeals are an option for whenever a citizen or contractor does not believe that the city staff are interpreting the code correctly. So they can appeal that interpretation of the code to the zoning board. That process is basically that the applicant states code interpretation is incorrect, and then they would have to prove that and argue their case to the zoning board. And you would have to then vote 4 out of 5 to overturn staff interpretation. This does set a precedent. So if you choose to overturn staff interpretation, that board decision and new interpretation becomes the rule and how we interpret that part of the code. So that is how we would then have to carry it out for all future cases. And then, as Lauren mentioned, the airport zoning board of adjustment, the ZBA does serve as the role of the airport zoning board if a height variance application is filed in accordance with the airport height hazard regulations. This does require FAA determinations, and staff does not give a recommendation. It's solely up to the board. We have never had a case so far in the history of the zoning board or the city or the airport, I should say. And if a request is filed, we would go through another detailed orientation about exactly what you would need to look at as the Airport Zoning Board of Adjustment. And with that, I'll turn it over to legal.
Good evening. For those of you that don't know me, I am Shay Smith. I'm an assistant city attorney here with the city, and usually I am going to be the attorney sitting at that side of the dais during your meetings, making sure that your Open Meetings Act rules are being followed, or that the Open Meetings Act is being followed. The Open Meetings Act is primarily what I'm going to talk about to you tonight, and that act exists just to make sure that there is transparency with regards to governmental and board meetings. It's making sure that the process is open to the public. So there are some basic requirements for open meetings. Meetings have to be posted 72 hours in advance. That includes posting on the city's website. The notices must state the date, hour, place, and subject matter of the meeting, and all of your decisions must happen in a public meeting. And the city secretary's office handles all of these publication requirements. So when you are having a meeting, you are only allowed to discuss those items that are posted on the published agenda. You are not allowed to have any discussion on an item that hasn't actually been published for discussion. You or staff may give factual information or policy statements in the event that there is any kind of inquiry that is made at a meeting. So what is a meeting? It is a quorum, which for this board would be 4 members, where you're discussing public business within your jurisdiction, and where there is going to actually be deliberation, discussion of ideas, and that it has required to be open to the public. There's one main exception you should probably be aware of, and that is executive sessions. That's where we could retreat to the back to receive advice from the attorney. For this board, that would be really rare. In the event that was to happen, we would go behind closed doors, you would have your deliberations, and then you would come back out here and make your actual vote on whatever the item was that was being discussed in the closed session. Most important thing to be aware of for you with regards to the Open Meetings Act is avoiding what's called a walking quorum. And that's where you have a meeting of less than a quorum present in one place at the same time, but through the way communication is disseminated, actually a quorum of you have actually somehow managed to have a conversation. So it's an overlapping series of meetings where a quorum is not in the same room at the same time. So this can be discussions that are happening over social media, by text, any kind of electronic communications, where, maybe one of you might send an email and you start replying to each other. And you might not all be on the same email chain, but eventually through you send an email to you and you send an email to you, there has actually been some sort of actual group discussion on the topic. Most important thing to keep in mind with regards to your email is try and avoid reply all. And that will help you avoid accidentally conducting a walking quorum. Not everything where there is a quorum of you are present is going to be a meeting. Social functions that are actually unrelated to board business are not necessarily considered to be a meeting. Regional, state, or national conventions or workshops, or ceremonial events. If you're all happen to be there at the same time and you're not discussing board meeting, the discussion is merely incidental. So, why do you need to know about the Open Meetings Act? Because there are actually civil and criminal violations. So if you were to take an action and say the meeting wasn't properly posted, then there is civil liability for that, and the action that you took would be voidable. Oops, went too far. Yeah. Next, there's actually criminal penalties. So if one of you was to call, organize, aid in calling or organizing, or participate in an unlawful closed meeting, it is considered a criminal violation. And if you knowingly engaged in basically a walking quorum, which is communication among a series of communications where the members engaging in the individual communications constitute fewer than a quorum, but the members engaging in the series of communications constitute a quorum, and the member knew it would involve a quorum, would constitute a deliberation once a quorum. Kind of a mouthful there. And the criminal penalty for that is $100 to $500 fine, 1 to 6 months in county jail, or potentially both a fine and jail. So here are just some best practices to keep in mind. Don't discuss ZBA cases outside of the posted meeting. Don't email other officials regarding board matters. Don't post about board matters on Facebook, Twitter, or anywhere else on social media unless you are willing to take a risk of committing a violation. Try and avoid a quorum of your fellow members outside of a formal meeting, unless it is covered by one of those exceptions I mentioned. And when you are actually in a meeting, try and stick to the topic of conversation. Try and stick to what is actually posted on the agenda. So before I get to the questions, I do want to mention one more thing, which I do not have a slide for, and that is conflicts of interest. One thing to be aware of, and this board doesn't see it as much as, say, City Council or the Planning and Zoning Commission, is that you are subject to laws regarding conflicts of interest. What you need to know is if there's ever, an item that's due to come before the board and it involves a property that you or a family member or a company you're associated with, or anyone that you have some sort of special relationship with, if there's a property that involves that, you may have a conflict of interest. If that happens, you would need to file a form with the city secretary's office prior to the meeting, and you would need to recuse yourself from the discussion and wouldn't be able to vote on the item. If that ever comes up, which again seems to be pretty rare for this particular board, if you have any questions about it all, please feel free to ask staff and we will help work you through it. And now if you have any questions for me, or I think that's the last slide. Yes.
To item 5, public hearing. Item 5A, public hearing, receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard regarding a proposed special exception to the rear yard setback for 1818 Pebble Hill Court, Lot 42, Block 1, Plantation Bend, Section 1, in the restricted single-family R-1R zoning district.
Good evening again.
Stephen.
So here we go with our first of two special exceptions. So as mentioned before, this is going to be what you typically will see. And as is usual, this is a request for a patio cover at the rear of a home. So this home is 1818 Pebble Hill Court. It was platted in 1991 and annexed in 1997. R1R zoning was placed on it, which is our restricted single-family residential, which means there is a 30-foot rear yard requirement for setbacks. They are requesting a special exception to allow for a patio cover at the rear of the house. You gotta go too far. Okay, so the recorded setback required a 2-foot rear yard setback for the per the deed restrictions. This was done through an HOA process. They allowed for a 2-foot rear yard setback for this exact patio cover. The R1R zoning requires a 30-foot rear yard setback, and the proposed patio cover addition does project into that required 30 feet. The existing house actually projects into the required 30 feet at only 17 feet from the rear property line. So that the addition would be about 2 feet from the rear property line, and the special exception would relieve that 30-foot requirement for the patio cover. So here we get to the plot plan or the site plan. So Pebble Hill, this is the street up here, and then this is the home, and then this is the rear here at this angle. So here at this corner is where the house is only 17 feet. So technically the 30-foot setback actually cuts off a whole corner of this house. So the house itself is already non-conforming. And they are asking for the special exception to allow for a patio cover addition that would come right up here to this easement line and be at 2 feet from the property line. So this is a little zoom in picture here drawn where the corner of the patio cover is 2 feet from that rear property line. These are some drawings. So this was an image taken and then overlaid with an approximation of what the patio cover would look like. So it is a matching shingled patio cover here at the side and rear of the house. Here you can see a Google excerpt that shows the exact property. So it does back up to some landscaped area. So this is an area that's owned by the HOA for landscaping. And you can also see that the house is very close to that rear property line. An analysis of the neighborhood. The patio cover does appear to be compatible with the overall neighborhood. There are about 6 homes nearby that do not meet that rear setback requirement of 30 feet. And there are 5 approved special exceptions that are also in the nearby vicinity. So you can see in yellow the other homes that appear to be less than 30 feet from the rear property line. And then in blue are the approved special exceptions. Notification for the public hearing requirements were all met. Property owners within 200 feet were notified, as well as the HOA, and an online form was provided to in advance to give comments. We did receive one form that was in favor, actually, of building a patio cover. Staff is also not aware of any opposition. That in favor comment did come, from the neighbor who would be most closely impacted by that patio cover. So it came from this property right here. So they would be the most visibly impacted by the patio cover, and they actually were in favor enough to send in a form. And staff is not aware of any opposition in this case. Therefore, staff does recommend approval with the condition that the addition be constructed in accordance with the site plan and elevations. And both myself and the applicant are here if you have any questions after the close of the hearing.
Okay, I'm going to open the public hearing. Does the applicant or anyone else want to be heard? No? Okay. Then I'm going to close the public hearing, and we will now move forward with consideration of and action on a proposed special exception to the rear yard setback for 1818 Pebble Hill Court, Lot 42, Block 1, Plantation Bend, Section 1 in the restricted single-family residential R-1R zoning district. And let's begin discussion of the criteria. The first criteria, the latest recorded plat of the property was approved prior to being annexed into the city. Do we agree that the plat was recorded prior to being annexed? Okay. We'll move on to the second criteria. The latest recorded plat or other recorded restriction for the property establishes a setback or other regulation that results in a setback that is less restrictive than the setback required by the City of Sugar Land Development Code, Chapter 2. Do we agree that the recorded restrictions are less restrictive than those established by the City of Sugar Land Development Code? Okay. Excuse me. We move on to the third criteria. Granting the special exception will not establish a setback that is less restrictive than the setback established by the latest approved plat or other recorded restriction. Do we agree that the proposed special exception is not less restrictive than the recorded restrictions?
Yes.
Okay. And now we move to the fourth criteria. Granting the special exception will not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the property or improvements in the district or neighborhood in which the property is located. Does the board have any questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, I will note that the staff has examined the proposed special exception for 3 key aspects. First, public safety review. There do not appear to be any public safety issues associated with this request. Staff has not identified safety concerns as a result of the patio cover. Number 2, rear yard setback comparison. The proposed addition appears to be generally compatible with the neighborhood based on an analysis of the surrounding area. Approximately 6 homes within the immediate area do not meet the rear yard setback requirements of 30 feet. There are 4 approved similar special exceptions in the area. The proposed addition is in compliance with the recorded restrictions. Number 3, general architectural. The proposed addition appears to be architecturally compatible with the existing single-family residence and neighborhood. If there are no additional comments, is there a motion for approval or denial? Mr. James?
I move that this special exception to the rear yard setback requirements in the restricted single-family residential R1R district for the property located 1818 Pebble Hill Court, Lot 42, Block 1, Plantation Bend, Section 1, be granted with the condition that the addition is constructed in accordance with attached site plan and elevations.
Mr. James has made a motion. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, there's a second from Ms. Peterson. Okay, at this time, we will vote. And the vote has passed unanimously. Okay, now we're moving on to item 5B, Public hearing, receive and hear all persons desiring to be heard regarding a proposed special exception to the street side yard setback for 642 Chevy Chase Circle, Lot 9, Block 1, Sugars Creek, Section 1, in the restricted single-family R-1R zoning district.
So, once again, we have another special exception, this time to the street side yard setback. So this is going to be for a corner lot in Sugar Creek, Section 1, at the corner of Chevy Chase Circle and Plantation Court. So that's this property right here in black. There is, again, R1R zoning, which, as I mentioned before, has a 20-foot street side setback. So that is going to be, standard across all of our residential districts. This property was platted in 1970 and annexed in 1984, and it is for a patio cover addition on that street side. The recorded plat established a 10-foot street side build line, and R1R zoning requires 20 feet. So the addition is attached to the side of the house as well as to the side of the garage and does project into that required street side yard. The existing house is about 25 feet from the street side property line, and the new addition will be about 13 feet. So it's about 7 feet encroaching into that street side yard. And the special exception would relieve that 20-foot requirement per R1R zoning. So here is the proposed site plan. On the right, you can see Chevy Chase, and then here at the bottom is Plantation Lane, not Court. And here is the proposed addition. So it is at the side of the house, connected to the side of the garage, and it is in line with the corner of that garage there. The proposed elevations of the structure, it is a pergola type structure, but per our code in the street side, the pergola does count as a patio cover. So it needs to come forward with that special exception. As you can see here, it does align with the front of the garage, and then it's at the side of the house. So an aerial excerpt from Google, you can see the existing house here, as well as the existing garage, and then Chevy Chase and Plantation, and that the proposed patio cover would be approximately here, kind of at that corner, right in that little niche between the home and the garage. An analysis of the area shows that this proposal does appear to be architecturally compatible. There are about 5 homes nearby, so pretty much every corner lot that doesn't meet that street side yard setback. Most of this property was developed with the 10-foot setback in mind. So there are also 4 approved special exceptions that are in the immediate vicinity, including some just across the street. Public hearing requirements were all met, including notification posted in the paper and online, and mailers sent out to the property owners within 200 feet and the HOA. An online form was made available as well, and we did receive 2 statements in opposition, as well as 1 general inquiry. Our engineering staff did evaluate some of the opposition comments, including some concerns about the effect of subsidence due to the patio cover and maybe some site distance issues. And we do have our engineering representative here to speak to that more, but they meet all of the requirements of the code, and engineering staff is not concerned about the effect of subsidence from this addition. Therefore, staff does recommend moving forward with approval of the special exception with the conditions that the patio cover be constructed in accordance with the site plan and elevations. And we do have staff here to answer any questions if you have them at the conclusion of the hearing.
Okay. All right, I'm going to open the public hearing. Is there anyone who wishes to be heard? Okay. And I'm going to close the public hearing. Now, we will now move forward with consideration of and action on a proposed special exception to the street side yard setback for 642 Chevy Chase Circle, Lot 9, Block 1, Sugar Creek, Section 1, in the restricted single-family residential R-1R zoning district. Let's begin discussion of the criteria. The first criteria, the latest recorded plat of the property was approved prior to being annexed into the city. Do we agree that the plat was recorded prior to being annexed? Okay. Move on to the second criteria. The latest recorded plat or other recorded restriction for the property establishes a setback or other regulation that results in a setback that is less restrictive than the setback required by the City of Sugar Land Development Code, Chapter 2. Do we agree that the recorded restrictions are less restrictive than those established by the City of Sugar Land Development Code. Yes? Okay. Third criteria, granting the special exception will not establish a setback that is less restrictive than the setback established by the latest approved plat or other recorded restriction. Do we agree that the proposed special exception is not less restrictive than the recorded restrictions? Yes. Okay. The fourth criteria, granting the special exception will not be detrimental to the public welfare or injurious to the property or improvements in the district or neighborhood in which the property is located. Does the board have any questions or comments about that criteria? Go ahead, Mr. James.
Just one clarification. In the pre-read, there was one statement of concern, and you noted in your presentation there was two plus another.
And a general inquiry, yes. I apologize, I forgot to print them out for you.
No worries, but could you just characterize that second objection?
So it was the same issues. It actually came
Okay.
from the same property, so,
No, that's fine. Okay, so
Okay.
I see the one, and, okay, and staff has reviewed that,
Mm-hmm.
addressed the three items that were listed there, and you have your recommendation. Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
Clarified. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mr. James. Does anyone else have any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Then staff has examined the proposed special exception for three key aspects. First, public safety review. There do not appear to be any public safety issues associated with this request. Staff has not identified safety concerns as a result of the patio cover. Number two, rear yard setback comparison. The proposed addition appears to be generally compatible with the neighborhood based on an analysis of the surrounding area. Approximately 5 homes within the immediate area do not meet the street side yard setback requirements of 20 feet. There are 4 approved similar special exceptions in the area. The proposed addition is in compliance with the recorded restrictions. Number 3, general architectural. The proposed addition appears to be architecturally compatible with the existing single-family residence and neighborhood. If there are no additional comments, does anyone have a motion? Mr. James.
So I move that the special exception to the street side yard setback requirements in the restricted single-family residential, R1R district, for the property located at 642 Chevy Chase Circle, Lot 9, Block 1, Sugar Creek, Section 1, be granted with the condition that the addition is constructed in accordance with attached site plan and elevations.
We have a motion by Mr. James. Do we have a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a second by Ms. Peterson and Mr. Becker. We'll take a vote now. Okay, and the motion passes unanimously. And finally, to adjourn the meeting, I'm going to ask at this time, anyone have a motion to adjourn? Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Becker. Anyone have a second?
Yes. Second.
Second by Mr. James. So let's vote. I'm going to assume that everyone voted, and I can't see on my thing. Approved it? Okay. All right. So at this time, the November 16, 2022 Zoning Board of Adjustment meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good job.
Okay. That's our Christmas present. I think we have to, oh, thank you, yeah, thank you. I think we have to sign something, right?
Huh? No, I don't. No, I didn't, I wasn't given it, no. I'm sorry, we can just. Is this the board that can't actually adjourn until it's signed?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, you can get the formal one if you have it.
I'm going to get you to sign the minutes, and obviously not as him, right? It would be the plan, Lisa. Thank you.
Yep.
Not very well prepared, am I?
No, you may ask. We're going on a family Christmas cruise to the New Zealand and Australia.
Oh, wow, okay.
We will be out of country.
Oh, so the next one's supposed to be on the 21st?
Yeah, I'm not going to be in either. I'm out of town.
That's gonna be a tough one, probably for everybody, right?
Maybe nobody got one. Maybe there won't be any proposed.
No, there is. They said there is. Yeah.
Motion to change the meeting date.
I mean, I have a feeling there won't be a quorum.
Yeah, we're looking forward to signing that for kids. It's our turn to.
Oh, yeah, that's right before Christmas.
Yeah.
That's the Wednesday, and then it's, yeah, because Christmas Eve and Christmas are over the weekend. So I mean, Thursday and Friday, I'm sure everyone's gonna be off anyways.
Yeah, I mean, kids have that whole week off. So
Wednesday's that last day.
I'm not in town. I'm going to Disneyland with the kids. I'm taking the kids to Disneyland. Yeah, especially during Christmas. It's really pretty.
And I figured I'd never have another opportunity to do it. So I flew out
Nice.
there, kind of did myself a grand tour, went to Cairns up in the northeast of Australia. I didn't go to New
Ski or
Zealand,
snowboard?
but
I usually ski.
I should have gone down.
Oh,
I was never big into snowboarding.
Yeah. We're gonna do that. We're gonna go to the,
Nice, sounds good.
Hopton, what are the places over there?
Fantastic. Well, if I don't see you sooner,
Yes.
happy trails.
Yes, thank you. Well, we'll see you next year.
From California, so
And,
we've both been to places in our sections, but haven't been to skiing Colorado yet.
See you all next month. Take care.
We're all around, right?
Well, I don't know if we met last time or not. I'm David James.
I'm Jan Peterson.
Jan, did it meet you? Okay, so now I know we're going to. Yeehaw. We'll see you next year.
Have a good day.
Yeah, same here. See you guys next.
We can log out here, I guess.
Probably.
I guess we want to just log out.